Hello again. You are listening to the Exit Light Podcast, Episode 8. Welcome back. My name is Eli Beals, author and narrator, an overall nice guy, I like to think. This time around, I have a single story for you titled The Man in the Chair, pulled from my anthology called The Exit Light, a collection of the perturbing sort, which is available on Amazon and Kindle. Stick around after the story for maybe some commentary on the story, because I don't want to spoil it for you. Hard to summarize. So, that being said, enjoy. The first time Tommy saw the man in the chair was 3 days ago. He was at the playground with other kids, under mild supervision from the parents, who sat on benches, either dishing gossip or immersed in their phones, looking up when a particularly loud or pain-filled cry from the collective gaggle of children was heard. Only then did the parental instinct kick in, and with laser-targeting precision, locate their child. To verify they weren't either the aggressor or victim of whatever caused the screech. Tommy was a curious boy, prone to wandering off in search of interesting insects instead of the playground dramas with the other kids. He was tracking a rather large grasshopper that would sort of fly in long arcs, its huge wings clacking in irate staccato flaps whenever Tommy would get too close. The grasshopper took him on a merry chase until it flitted out and over the little creek that ran along the bicycle path. Tommy knew better than to follow any further, as he was well out of sight of his mother. This thought had him turn promptly around and come face to face with the man in the chair. His visage, a twisted arrangement of face parts, as if someone had taken a fork, stabbed him right on the nose and twisted counterclockwise like spaghetti. Tommy fell backwards, his heels scraping against the path, allowing him to scoot a ways, but still in reach of the monster before him. When the man made no threatening movements, Tommy calmed down a bit, but could not look away from him, as if trying to mentally arrange his form into something more human-shaped. He had 2 arms, 2 legs, hands and feet, but they were all wrong, positioned in ways that made them seem vestigial, disused, palsied. He was clearly in pain as he struggled to utter something Tommy could not quite understand. It was just a garbled gasp. What sent Tommy scampering off was the panic-tinged voice of his mother approaching. As he emerged from the shade of the trees, he sprinted towards her and burst into hysterics, babbling unintelligibly about the man he had just encountered near the stream. She scolded him for running off alone, and that he was lucky the man didn't throw him into a potato sack and carry him off. That was a common thing, she said, as if these were normal things scary men did to children. Tommy was dubious about this particular man, but the realms and antics of adults were still mystifying to him. The second time he saw him was after school the following day, this time as he was exiting the bus. As he hopped from the bottom step onto the sidewalk, the force of his landing caused the books in his backpack to split the zipper seam, allowing them to tumble out, flapping to the ground. The other kids passing him by laughed and teased him. By the time he had it all settled back into his now useless backpack, the bus was trundling away. As the yellow bulk of it left his field of vision, there the man was, across the street, staring at him, his head cocked to one side, as if he were listening very closely to his bony shoulder. With painstaking effort, he lifted his hand that curled into a loose claw of swollen joints and untrimmed translucent fingernails, as if he were beckoning him, as if he had something important to tell him. The gesture was lost on Tommy, benign or otherwise. Clutching his ruined bag in a hug, he ran off, casting furtive glances behind him to make sure he wasn't being pursued. The man lowered his shriveled hand and seemed to shrink even further into his chair. When he saw the man in the chair for the third time, across the street from his house later that day, he decided to mention it to his mother. Her expression shifted from mild bemusement to genuine concern as he spoke. The idea that anyone would be following her son was well and truly disturbing. However, she reasoned that he was at an age that had his imagination going full tilt, and that some embellishment had been threaded into his story. She wanted to assure him that monsters aren't real, that he was safe. But after kissing him goodnight, she made sure that the doors and windows were locked tight. After a while, his anxiety melted away into the familiar and welcome threshold of sleep. But just as he began to slide into slumber, something caused his eyes to flare open. It wasn't a noise, exactly, more like an intrusive thought that had him immediately awake. The darkness of the room had his senses on overdrive. Every imagined noise was a subtle creak of hard rubber on the ground. Every snap and rustling was the man's labored procession inching closer. He imagined the man just outside, separated by a few inches of wood, plaster, and glass, but at the same time close enough to hear him breathing. He could almost see his long, ragged fingernails scraping against the mesh screen, attempting to worry it loose. He would pour into the room like some kind of spider, to land on top of him, pinning him beneath his covers, and stare with those sunken, hungry eyes. Petrified and unwilling to let his guard down, he did not sleep at all that night. He was going to the doctor, his mother had announced. Upon seeing his haggard face at the breakfast table, he didn't know what a doctor would be able to do about this, but he went along with it for the promise of a happy meal afterwards. As they were backing out of the driveway, he peeked into the side view mirror to see him there on the corner as the car turned. Tommy watched him diminish in the small portal behind the stenciled phrase, "Objects in mirror are closer than they appear." He was beginning to think he was going insane, as he was becoming more and more convinced that he was the only one who could even see this man. Sure enough, as they were walking down a lane of parked cars, he was there, hunched and twisted as ever, and yet invisible to his mother. Her passing glance did not falter as they went by, and only when she felt Tommy squeeze her hand a bit harder did she suspect anything was wrong. Tommy pointed, a straight line to the figure huddled there between a minivan and a convertible. She sighed, exasperated and very worried. saying in her calmest, most soothing tones, "Tommy, there isn't anyone there." The appointment was nothing like any doctor's visit he had ever been to before, and thankfully bereft of sharp, pointy things that made his arm hurt for days. Instead, there were lots of questions about any pain or sensitivity to sound or light. After a few minutes inside a metal tube that hummed slightly, which took pictures of the inside of his head, the doctor and his mother chatted for a while, and whatever news that was conveyed seemed only to perplex her further. She said they would have to just wait and see. The look on her face belied an entirely different temperature of concern, one that only hinted at a deep inward fear that whatever was wrong with her son was something that could not by any means be diagnosed. The red box with yellow lettering got more than a few wistful glances as Tommy walked through the hallway and back out to his favorite lunch spot. He was halfway done eating his cheeseburger when he heard a voice behind him say in a mocking drawl, "Aw, you got a Happy Meal?" The voice belonged to a notorious bully named Donald, and he wasn't alone. But then, bullies rarely ever are. Tommy's heart sank at the approaching pack of them, sneering like hyenas.
"Did you get a toy?"
Donald asked with an almost genuine expression. Not seeing he had much of a choice, he reached into the box and pulled out a cheeseburger-shaped man, wearing an old-fashioned police cap.
"Ooh, let me see,"
Donald said, and snatched it from Tommy.
"I've always wanted one of these,"
the large red-faced boy said, more to his gang, and much to their amusement. Tommy could only stare in indignant shock as the group of them began to move off.
"Wait, that's mine,"
Tommy shouted. The group stopped and turned back to face him. Donald approached, casually tossing Officer Cheese into the air.
"What'll you give me for it?"
he said with a smug grin.
"Nothing. It's mine. Give it back,"
Tommy said, tears starting to burn in his eyes. Donald's face smushed up in a theatrical mask of despair as he loomed over the much smaller boy, his meaty fist wrenching at the side of his face in cartoonish dismay. His goons chuckled at this, but Donald sensed his audience wasn't amused enough.
"Okay then. You want it?"
He cocked his arm back and hurled Officer Cheese over the fence and into the street beyond school property.
"Go get it,"
Donald sneered and turned to rejoin his cackling friends. Tommy watched in mute fury as they sauntered off, replaying the scene to each other in exaggerated pantomimes. His lunch forgotten, he ran to the fence and began to climb. This got the attention of one of the guard duties that began to jog in his direction, but he was already at the top and beginning to descend. His entire focus was on his toy, slightly blurred by the tears of anger and humiliation. He didn't hear the frantic shouts coming from the woman or the intermittent whistle blows. He was about halfway to his goal when the object of his focus was suddenly eclipsed in the shade. It was the man in the chair. He was parked right over the toy, and with some effort he pressed the joystick forward and began to advance on Tommy. The grim look on his tortured face made Tommy stop and retreat, unable to break eye contact. Backpedaling, his feet connected with the curb and he fell onto the concrete with a yelp. The man had also stopped. He was just sitting there in the middle of the road as if waiting for something. A look of satisfaction clearly conveyed on his horrible features. Tommy felt it before he saw it. A large truck, rumbling along at a velocity not typically advised on a street so close to a school, appeared. It hit the speed bump with a loud, grinding crunch as it momentarily gained a few feet of air. Upon landing, sparks shot out from the front end, and the vehicle swerved in a manic arc, resulting in a full spin as it collided with a parked car not 2 feet where Tommy was. In the smoke of burnt rubber and vapor from a ruptured radiator, he saw the man briefly. His face, no longer disfigured, was handsome, unscarred, and vaguely familiar. He smiled, not breaking his gaze from Tommy's. He stood without effort and walked away before vanishing entirely. Okay, so story's over. What did you think happened? For me, this was a question sometimes asked in conversation, maybe even therapy, is if there was something you could tell your younger self, what would it be and why? In this case, I think it's pretty obvious what the man in the chair was telling his younger self. The situation, although it's more complex than that. If somebody were to come to you when you were a kid, telling you to do something, how would you respond? Hindsight, after all, is 20/20. Foresight is rare. Once again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.